So here it is, the hill that I'm prepared to die on. Spend any time at all on the internet as a comic book fan, and you'll inevitably encounter somebody bashing Rob Liefeld. Whether it's sharing the infamous Captain America image, which, fun fact, was never actually published nor intended to be published in a comic book, or just bemoaning his prickly online persona. As is the case with many of the medium's most controversial figures, see Dan Slott as a prime example, getting blocked on Twitter by Robbie L is considered a badge of honour by many fans. So ingrained in the culture of comics is the Liefeld loathing that when I've expressed my deep-rooted love for the artist's work in the past, it's been interpreted as me damning him with faint praise. I mean, I couldn't possibly find merit in the scratchy, footless figures of Liefeld's early 90s Marvel work, or the squinting, anguished expressions of his original Image Comics creations, except that I do. Hey heroes, Josh here from Panels to Pixels, and although I'm going to get flamed for this one, this is why you're wrong about Rob Liefeld. Chapter 1. Introducing the lethal Liefeld.
So how long have you been drawing comic books?
Since I was about 7 years old, little kid.
What'd your parents think about it?
They hated it. Oh yeah. After I got a job and they saw that you can make a living out of it, you'll hear no complaints anymore.
And you created X-Force?
Mm-hmm.
So what is the drawing on?
This is the Spike Man.
And what's this right here?
This is the camera on top of your head that will record the wrongdoings of others.
So Rob, have you had any formal art training?
No. Just a lot of imagination, I think. Wait, so I say it and then look down? Or just open it and say it?
Fly button?
Before I go any further, here's the skinny on the man who made scoliosis sexy, with his broken-backed babes and bulging, bepouched brutes. Rob Liefeld is a California-born comic book writer and artist who rose to prominence in the early 1990s thanks to his work on the New Mutants and X-Force. At Marvel Comics, he co-created the characters Cable and Deadpool, for whom he's probably best known, and broke all kinds of crazy sales records with X-Force issue 1.
Money. I got money.
As one of the original founders of Image Comics, he's been a vocal advocate for creator-owned comics and helped to make Image the third biggest publisher of American comic books, opening the door for such critically acclaimed indie darlings as Robert Kirkman's The Walking Dead and Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. The first thing that's important to recognise about Rob Liefeld is that he was only 16 when he first entered the comic book industry. He was given the keys to his first 5-issue miniseries at age 21 with DC's Hawk and Dove, and he was almost entirely self-taught. Before Liefeld, cartoonists traditionally spent years lurched over their drafting tables, mastering their crafts and cutting their teeth in commercial illustration jobs. Look at the legendary comics creators of the Silver and Bronze Ages, and the majority of them entered the industry as seasoned professionals, with actual qualifications from actual art and design schools, many of them middle-aged before they ever put pen to paper on a Marvel or DC book. Liefeld, on the other hand, embarked on his new comic book career as green as a gooseberry. He was just a kid, but crucially to his appeal, he was a kid drawing stuff that other kids wanted to see.
Oh, baby, too. Now my size, I'm lucky to match you. I don't care what you think of this, as I find me.
As the music and fashion of grunge took hold of popular culture in the early 1990s, eschewing the cock rock and coke-fueled excesses of the previous decade, a new generation of comic pros were busy taking the power back from editorial oppression. No more was this Jim Shooter's carefully curated line of Marvel Comics. Creators like Liefeld, along with his peers Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, Eric Larson, and the rest of the founding fathers of Image Comics, sought to take complete control of their creative output. This was punk rock comic books in the mainstream, and like punk, it wasn't so much about the quality of the work itself, but the general attitude and freedom of expression. Raw, unpolished, and uninhibited, Marvel's hot young artists broke free from the shackles of editorial interference and the pontificating purple prose of pretentious writers. You want to see 22 pages of nothing but Spider-Man and his greatest foes twisting and contorting their bodies like a Halloween party for yoga instructors? Well, dream it, draw it, and comics reading kids lapped it up. It's kind of difficult to look back on this period from a helicopter view and appreciate it as anything more than the most superficial juvenile dreck. I keep drawing parallels between comics and grunge in the early 1990s due to the DIY ethos of its creators. But meanwhile, at the box office, the films of James Cameron and Michael Bay reigned supreme. The influence of the action blockbuster on modern superhero comics is undeniable. Arnold Schwarzenegger set a new standard for what the male body could look like, and by comparison, superheroes suddenly didn't look so super. Comic artists had no choice but to bulk up their figures, adding muscles on top of muscles. Whether it was biceps or boobs, bigger meant better. You might think that punk rock, with its denouncement of performative masculinity, would be ideologically opposed to the roided up, muscle-bound meatheads of mindless action flicks. but somehow these two diametric forces fused into something that belonged only to comics. The 1990s was, after all, the decade of eclecticism. Art and fashion had become a melting pot of influences, blending the timeless Americana of the 1950s, the psychedelic stoner culture of the 1960s and 70s, and the hypercolour hang-ons of the 1980s, plus the adoption of postmodernism and abstract art in mainstream graphic design. This was the era of throwing everything at the wall and seeing what stuck. Comic art became more graphic and stylised than ever before. Gone were the days of 6-panel grids. Let's make every page a splash page, because why the hell not? Liefeld, Lee, McFarlane and co. pushed the form of sequential art beyond its logical limits in a way that simply hadn't been seen before and has defined the medium to this very day. Okay, some of these confused layouts are a headache to read now, but sometimes you have to push boundaries to figure out where those boundaries lie. Chapter 2. New King on the Block.
And you know what I love? I love when people, in the last 5 years, it's happened a lot, they bring me pouches to sign. Brand spanking new pouches, and I sign them or I draw on them. That's cool. You know what? I made a niche for myself. You identify that with me. Something. You know how many artists would love to be identified, period?
When I first started writing this video, I had to resist the temptation to simply compare Rob Liefeld's work to that of other comic book cartoonists. Now, I could show you a bunch of fan favourite artists with technical virtuosity out the wazoo. Their figures are anatomically correct, their line work is flawless, all of their light sources are exactly where they should be, and their photorealistic facial expressions are only matched by their mastery of perspective. But their sequential storytelling flat out sucks. There's no energy, no movement, no dynamism. All of the things that Liefeld excels at. In his own words,
I never really thought of myself as a great artist. I think of myself as a creative storyteller. I think that in and of itself can grab people's attention. Guys who tell exciting stories, who know how to manipulate the camera or the page. I think you can actually get away with not being Michelangelo and still make it work.
And when it comes to exciting, dynamic comic book storytelling, Rob learned from the best. Jack Kirby's influence can be found all over Liefeld's work, from the exaggerated anatomy and dramatic poses to the distorted perspectives. Kirby's impact is evident in the way that Liefeld juxtaposes the organic and kinetic energy of his figures against intricate mechanical backgrounds. In Youngblood issue 2, he even based an original character around the King of Comics, complete with Kirby crackle effects. But this influence wasn't only seen on the page. Famed for being able to turn out an average of 20 pages per week, Jack Kirby was a comic-making machine. Legend has it that in 1968, after regular Captain America artist Jim Steranko failed to meet a deadline, Kirby cranked out an entire issue in one weekend. It's an industry-wide feat that will likely never be replicated, but one of the few artists to ever come close to matching his speed was Rob Liefeld. In fact, there was a point in the mid-1990s when he was arguably the hardest working comic pro in the biz. As head of his own Extreme Studios and launching more and more new titles each month, perhaps Liefeld's biggest crime was that he was just too ambitious. It's tough for any creator to keep pace on the treadmill of monthly comics, but even harder when you have the attention span of a 20-something kid and a head full of wild ideas. It was at this time that the young artist gained a reputation for missed deadlines and delayed books. There were even reports of inkers getting pages of stick figure layouts while Rob bounced from one project to the next. By his own admission, Liefeld had bitten off more than he could chew.
I realized that when I was doing Youngblood, I wasn't having a good time. It wasn't for me because I think I was in way over my head. I made a lot of mistakes.
They say that the flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long, and Rob Liefeld certainly conducted himself in the manner of a creator whose success could be taken away as quickly as it was gained. For me, this only adds to the admiration I have for his work during this period. As we've already established, Liefeld lacked any kind of formal training, and was limited only by his own imagination, and the number of hours he could spend drawing in a day. Here's a young artist working purely on intuition, from his mind's eye to the tip of his pencil and out onto the page. He may have been churning this stuff out like it was going out of fashion, and pretty soon it would be, but what he was producing was real seat-of-the-pants stuff, and that's exactly why it was so exciting. During this time, Liefeld furiously sketched out page after page with a kind of vibrancy seldom seen in comics today, and he made every inch of every damn panel count. There's an old adage amongst artists, writers and musicians that style is the stuff you get wrong. That's certainly true of Rob Liefeld, whose signature style is instantly recognisable. But it was also true of Jack Kirby. Hell, there's a whole blog dedicated to Kirby's trademark squared off hands, and have you ever noticed how many of his characters are either wearing some wacky alien headgear or rocking a fierce flow to obscure their ears? The guy clearly hated drawing ears. One of the most frequent criticisms levelled at Liefeld is that he lacks the fundamentals of drawing and an anatomical understanding of the human body. But what both Liefeld and Kirby knew is that technicality must always take a backseat to storytelling. You could drive yourself crazy trying to break down Kirby's anatomy, with deltoids and triceps not functioning in a way even remotely true to life. Often, a quick squiggle serves to merely hint at the musculature of his characters, because all of that stuff is superfluous to action, drama, and excitement. At the end of the day, I think a lot of the backlash against Rob Liefeld's work comes down to one thing, and that's this misconception that good art equals realism. Chapter 3. Realism is overrated.
I know that my work is already a sort of hotbed topic, but I believe in my stuff and I know that I will try to improve on a daily basis. Figures, expressions, storytelling and background, I just want to do as much work as I can.
People often get hung up on comic book art as if there is less room for abstraction. I mean, this has to look like real life, right? Otherwise, how can we believe that an alien humanoid could fly and shoot lasers out of his eyes? Liefeld's art is fun and expressionistic. Taking inspiration from artists like Frank Miller and Art Adams, he deformed his figures and brought a kind of cinematic flair to his layout and composition. These stylistic affectations were a breath of fresh air in comics and were seen as the impetus for his initial success. Every time Rob draws a character the way only he can, he is making conscious choices. The extreme close-ups, the dramatic foreshortening, the plasticky pained expressions and pointy, elongated limbs. Characters are distorted and stretched to simulate motion, while every panel is so crammed full of speed lines that reading a Liefeld comic is akin to riding a roller coaster. It all combines into a totally unique aesthetic, one that combines hyper-realistic shading and rendering with exaggerated cartoony anatomy. But don't just take my word for it, Liefeld's art has garnered many fans within the comic book industry, from Mark Millar to Jeff Loeb. Liefeld's friend and creator of The Walking Dead, Robert Kirkman, had this to say: "Everything he draws is interesting, whether it's accurate or not. A lot of people look at the way Rob draws the human body and they say, that's wrong in my eyes. I would say that these people have no joy in their souls. It's not like Rob doesn't know what a human body looks like. I think Rob looks at a human body and goes, that's boring, I can do better." Personally, I've always loved the way that Liefeld draws his heroes, with the ballooning legs that taper to tiny feet. But then you have characters like Youngblood's Badrock, with great big hooves and absolute cankles of chaos. The contrast between these two figures tells the reader immediately about their characters, and what their strengths and weaknesses are. That in itself is an effective storytelling device. And speaking of Youngblood. Chapter 4. Youngblood, Sweat and Tears. In preparation for this video, I read and reread a lot of early Rob Liefeld comics. From his first works at DC with Hawk and Dove, his breakthrough New Mutants and X-Force runs over at Marvel, and as much Youngblood as I could get my little mitts on. What I discovered was an artist whose shortcomings were outweighed by the fact that he kept pushing himself forward, growing and growing from one issue to the next. Take a look at Liefeld's earliest published works, and even his greatest detractors would have a hard time finding anything too egregious or offensive. These pages are about as old school and conventional as comics get, which just further indicates to me that all of the Liefeldisms that we know and love are the result of years of development and fine-tuning, the evolution of his characteristic style. With Youngblood issue 1, Liefeld not only spearheaded the launch of Image Comics, but he finally had total agency over his published work. The result, while not without flaws, is impressive in its scope and ambition. And as the series progresses, barely an issue of Youngblood goes by without Rob experimenting with some new page layout or orientation, with big gratuitous double-page spreads and costumes that devolve into self-parody. One thing that I feel is often misunderstood about Liefeld's work is that his art is inconsistent. I prefer to view it as an artist challenging himself with every page. I see a cartoonist playing with the form while paying tribute to the comics he grew up reading and loving. Youngblood is a celebrity super team, sanctioned and overseen by the US government. Just as Liefeld was catapulted to comic book superstardom with little to no industry experience, the members of Youngblood are chosen not necessarily for their crime-fighting prowess, but because they fit the cosmetic ideals of a superhero team. The whole conceit of the book is a commentary on the superficiality of comics at the time, and a reflection on Rob's own sudden rise to fame. Even the name, Youngblood, alludes to Liefeld's perceived status in the industry as the cocky young upstart taking on the old guard of comics. Each of Youngblood's team members appear to reflect a different facet of Liefeld's own experiences and personality. Vogue, one of the femme fatales of the group, is obsessed with maintaining her youthful appearance, going so far as to launch her own line of cosmetics. Similarly, the team's leader, Shaft, struggles with body image anxieties, a result of the pressures of fame. He fears getting out of shape and losing his place on the team. From day one, critics in publications like Wizard magazine and the Comics Journal told Liefeld that he was just a flash in the pan, that his star would soon fade. A sequence in Youngblood issue 3 lampoons the escalating commercialism around the comics biz, as Shaft is enthusiastically told that his new action figure will have 4 variants for, quote, maximum earning potential. Badrock, Liefeld's surrogate Ben Grimm, is ostensibly more concerned with TV talk show appearances and flogging merchandise than performing any kind of superheroics. The team's manager was even based on Rob's real-life manager. The Hollywood lifestyle depicted in the pages of Youngblood represents a version of the world the young cartoonist had found himself in, amplified up to 11 in his distinctive style. Now, this idea of a celebrity superhero team would be further explored in DC's The Authority and Marvel's Ecstatics, but Youngblood got there first. And at a time when the speculator market had driven media interest around comics to an all-time high, the series could not have been more relevant. Chapter 5. The Kurt Cobain of comics.
I don't know, I've just noticed that people expect more of a thematic angle with our music. You know, they always want to read into it, and before I was just using pieces of poetry and just garbage, you know, just stuff that just would spew out of me at the time. And a lot of times when I write lyrics, it's just at the last second because I'm really lazy.
Like Liefeld, Kurt Cobain was young, self-taught, and an unlikely candidate for superstardom. The raw power of Nirvana's stripped-down sound resonated with an entire generation of disaffected youths. In interviews, Cobain treated songwriting with the same kind of irreverence as Liefeld did narrative structure, and the reluctant rock star couldn't have busted out a Van Halen guitar solo even if he wanted to. The so-called grunge musicians of the Seattle scene didn't gain popularity because of their technical virtuosity, rather in spite of it. Bands like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains and Soundgarden thumbed their noses at the posturing power ballads and hedonistic hair metal of the 1980s. Meanwhile, the British invasion of comic books, with seminal works by writers such as Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman, had left the medium in a state of gloomy navel-gazing. Liefeld, McFarlane, all those guys took comic books back to their American superhero roots, hitting the reset button for a new generation of readers and providing a shot in the arm for the industry. And I'm sorry to say that anybody going into Youngblood and expecting Watchmen is completely missing the point. At the peak of his popularity, Rob Liefeld's work may have been unrefined, amateurish, ugly even, but it was also powerful, thrilling, and at times avant-garde. On one of his early assignments for DC Comics, Liefeld surprised his editor by submitting page layouts oriented sideways, so the reader would have to turn the book 90 degrees to make sense of it. The letters column of Hawk and Dove issue 5 mentions that Rob showed something new to an editor who thought he'd seen everything. This concept of a landscape comic is something that Liefeld would later explore along with Todd McFarlane in an X-Force Spider-Man crossover, offering readers a panoramic view of the action. Over at Image, Rob shocked readers by publishing issue 25 of his Bloodstrike series after issue 10, as a kind of flash forward, with the promise that issues 11 to 24 would fill in the gaps. Gimmicky? Maybe, but it hadn't been done before, and it was a novel storytelling technique nonetheless. With the ill-fated Evangeline and Glory crossover, Goddessy, from his Maximum Press imprint, Liefeld depicts a crucified Jesus Christ coming down off the cross and throwing fists with Zeus. I shit you not. It's kind of awe-inspiring in how misguided and distasteful it is, even more so when you consider that Liefeld is the son of a Baptist minister. What I see when I look at these examples is an artist doing whatever the hell they want to do. It's creative expression in its purest, provocative, most unapologetic form. And I think there's something to be gained from that, even today in the year of our Lord 2020. Superheroes and comic book characters are more mainstream than they have ever been. They dominate our pop culture. But in order to be readapted and sold to the masses, certain concessions have had to be made. There's a kind of inherent self-consciousness that goes along with comic book stuff. It's as if the dorks who grew up reading this stuff before they were cool are worried that the world is going to suddenly turn around and say, haha, fooled you, we were only pretending to like this stuff, you f***ing dweeb. It's why every superhero film has that little comedy button at the end of every action beat, or a moment where the hero pulls a comic-accurate costume out of a closet and says, no. It's the filmmaker's way of saying, we know this is dumb, but just go with us on this one. And even in the comics themselves, writers and artists are taking their cues from the movies. The visuals have become more photorealistic, and the dialogue is more grounded and conversational. The more esoteric elements of the superhero genre have been pushed out to the fringes and indified in books like Ms. Marvel or The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. Conversely, what Liefeld attempted in the early 90s was a kind of heightened ridiculousness. Knowingly or not, he was parodying the superhero genre and drawing focus to the innate absurdity of these stories. Rather than apologising for the medium's quirks, the New Mutants, X-Force and Youngblood were unashamedly silly. He brought a white-hot intensity and kinetic energy to traditional comics. And just as Nirvana, for better or worse, reshaped the sound of rock music for the next 30 years, so too did Rob Liefeld help redefine the artistic language of comics.
But tonight, Michelle Holden attended a premiere that stars a 24-year-old artist and a cast of characters that are, well, unreal.
Rob Liefeld's massive popularity in the early 90s was one of the main catalysts of the comic book boom, and he was an unfortunate casualty of the eventual bust. As the industry tried to regain its footing by focusing only on direct market sales and more adult-oriented graphic novels, the work of Liefeld and his peers was seen as juvenile. I want you to imagine yourself as a Star Wars-obsessed kid, just wanting to draw comic books for a living like your heroes Jack Kirby, George Perez, and Art Adams. Suddenly, you're not only doing that, but you're the highest-selling artist of all time at age 23. Then you're starting your own company. You're responsible for launching the career of countless artists, inkers, and colorists. You find yourself having to make business decisions at a young age and in an industry where there was no precedent for that level of success. And you make some questionable business decisions. And then, as quickly as it all happened, it's gone. You're the punching bag of the internet, the butt of a million jokes about feet, pouches, and Captain America's tits. And yet the guy is still out there drawing comics, because that's all he ever wanted to do. And it's not like he needs the money either, after the career he's had. I'm sure Rob Liefeld could comfortably never draw another page in his life. Look, I challenge you to find a more enthusiastic pro in the industry. Just look at the dude's Instagram. He's interacting with fans, he's sometimes telling his fans to go f*** themselves, but most importantly, he's sharing his unwavering passion for comics. You don't have to enjoy Rob Liefeld's art as much as I do, but you cannot deny his place in the history of comic books. He's created characters that have endured for 30 years, and along with his Image Comics contemporaries, he pushed the industry forward and left an indelible mark on the medium. And the best part? He did it all on his own terms. Whew, thank you for watching this video. I put a ton of work into this one, probably more hours than I've ever spent on any of my previous videos. It was a massive undertaking, but it was really fun, so thank you for getting this far. If you want to see more stuff like this, then please subscribe to Panels to Pixels, and also let me know in the comments that you enjoyed the video and you want to see more stuff like this. You can support the channel on Patreon by going to patreon.com/panelstopixels. That really helps. I also just want to say a massive thanks to Matt Draper for script support. He's one of the best comic book YouTubers in the universe, I would say. So go subscribe to him, definitely. Also, thank you to Xavier Mendoza, aka Godzilla Mendoza, on YouTube. I'm sure you know his channel. But if not, you should definitely go subscribe to him. Tell him I sent you. But the links for both of those channels will be in the description, so go check that out. Until next time, go read some Rob Liefeld comics. That's what I'll be doing. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.